That's 10:02. So I will just go with the introductions for now. So I'm Brendan Garrity. I'm the Chief Executive of the Association for Rental Living, and we are the voice and the advocates for all things built to rent in the UK. And part of our remit is to is to capture and create and distribute high quality information, high quality ideas. And indeed, this is what our webinar series is often about. But today in particular, I think we have some very interesting ideas that are going to be discussed. The concept is profitable neighborhoods. It's something that has been created by Kenny Ash of Ash Sakula Architects, who's a well-known architect, but with a particular specialism in housing, and has worked all over the UK. And Kenny's proposition really about these profitable neighborhoods is looking to the past to give us clues and ideas and to inform the future and how we move away from the, in a sense, the status quo. Not that the status quo is all bad, but that we need to evolve, and we need to evolve thoughtfully and intelligently to create better products, better solutions for our towns and cities. And as we move into what will hopefully be a very, very strong period of building homes under a new Labour government, and with new towns potentially in the offing as well, we really do need to look at and consider what might be the solutions for these new towns, for the new neighborhoods which will be created across the country, and how they deal with all the things that are necessary to deliver a successful scheme. So that's the concept. Those are the ideas. Kenny will talk us through those in a few minutes, but we are also joined by Zafar Banu, who is the CEO of Limitless Real Estate, which I think is a great name, I have to say. We're also Simon Ricketts, partner at Town Legal LLP. So we're going to have some heavyweight opinion coming in from that side of things. And Mike Jones, planning partner at Bidwells, which of course are multidisciplinary and heavily involved in all things built to rent and indeed development across the piece. So enough from me. Kenny, I hand over to you. Just so everybody knows, there will be a Q&A session amongst the speakers. There's a Q&A button on the Zoom call. You can put your questions in there. Once everybody's had finished with their bits of the presentation, we'll have a general Q&A and open that up to any participants as well. Kenny, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So it's interesting to be talking to a number of different audiences around our concept of profitable neighbourhoods. We're Ash Sakula Architects and have won a lot of housing design awards and housing and awards for built work, and we have evidence of a lot of people enjoying living in the neighbourhoods that we make. Well, what we're seeing is that there aren't enough neighbourhoods which are conceived from the inside out, from the consumer side, and we're going to be hearing some of the ambitions in this session from, say, Zafar about how that can change. I think while we're optimistic about the numbers of homes that are going to be made, we're also extremely interested in driving out the car as the dominant design concept in and around our homes, so that we can make convivial spaces which build on the social contract, which create some value for people. So not only do we want these lots more homes, we want those homes to be in the right places. And this is something that the NPPF is really strong on. And in paragraph 85, there is this sentence: the approach taken should allow each area to build on its strengths, counter any weaknesses, and address the challenges of the future. And I think that the future, putting the future first, is so important. We've just seen over the last few years how the future has changed, and how things that were unimaginable in terms of transport before now seem perfectly reasonable. Where people work is changed. So we all know that. But in order to check on the profit side of our profitable neighborhoods, we need to zoom right in there and see what is the value that we're delivering to people in their daily lives. And an intelligent new neighborhood will deliver to the local and micro economy, not just within this particular neighborhood, but also all the adjacent neighborhoods. And this is where building at scale, as the new government proposes, is a way to strengthen our high streets and our civic life in towns all around the country. And how do we know that this is going to work? Well, it's our innate knowledge. It's our birthright, if you like, that we have thousands and thousands of successful towns, and these have been proved, tested in so many different ways and adapted to so many different economic situations over time. So we have, if you like, multiple templates that we can use. And the joy of these templates is it's not just a design manual. They're actually built and occupied. So, however, because we're kind of British and we like to be reasonable, the NPPF also has another paragraph, which is paragraph 89, and that says that planning policies and decisions should recognise that sites to meet local businesses and community needs might be in locations that are not well served by public transport. And this is where I think all of us need to get a little bit more serious, a little bit more angry, if you like, and say, no, actually, that doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense for UK PLC, doesn't make sense for the families living there. It certainly doesn't make sense for women who need careers and teenagers who need to get out. We've got to stop building isolated communities. So with fewer cars and fewer journeys, we can densify these places, and we can basically put a house on top of a house, which is what we're proposing. So these terraces that come together to make the neighborhoods, they feel like 3-story neighborhoods, because every other house is a 4-story house. So there's a nice crenellation at the top of the terraces. Also, these terraces, which the core unit, we're calling the twins. So both of these houses here have 2 front doors, but every other one, the top maisonette flips. So you get an equal amount of garden space at the top as at the bottom of your house. So you've got 2 houses, a lower house and an upper house. And what we would like to persuade all of you is that the profit comes in the density. It costs a little bit more to build a 4-story house than a 2-story house, but the profit that can come out of doing that well, and it becoming a really good popular build-to-rent product, is immense. And the important thing, as we all know, is to avoid voids, so that every home is occupied. And in order to do that, we're seeing the profit and the value in the lives of the people there, the way that they can live. So the twins, they make these long terraces. They generally run north to south. We've tested them on sites from 45 homes in Lewis to 8,000 in a site in Slovakia. We know that we can make amenity in these places in a very organic way that is resident-led, and it allows for participation in the professional organization of this build-to-rent landscape. I'd like to now pass on to Zafar, who's going to talk about his adventures in the new landscape.
Thank you, Canny. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning. So thank you very much to Ash Sakula and the ARL for giving me the opportunity to do so. So just for context, I'm approaching this conversation this morning as a developer, contractor, and fundamentally an operator. And it's important because I really want to understand what the consumer needs are and really approaching the problem or the challenge or the opportunity from the consumer's end first. Now, if we zoom out a level or two, I think the build to rent sector, and there's multiple tenures within that, so single family, co-living and various other elements, all fall within this broader umbrella. So I'm talking about the broader market here. I think the market historically, and when I say historically, it's still quite a nascent sector. So in the last 8 to 10 years, has really been focused on the B2B side of things because that's where decisions have been made. But fundamentally, there's a real missed opportunity because we're not really focused on what the consumer needs are. So I think as a developer, contractor, operator, that actually the market's been driven by the wrong things. And that's what I would like to sort of pose to yourselves, my colleagues here on the call. Actually, we need to reshape the focus here. So if it's been driven by archaic planning systems with an old use class order that doesn't really serve the need of today and innovative products, and it's also been driven by short-term capital that really pushes for a certain type of product, it's not really going to solve the problem that we're seeking to solve. And if we look now at sort of entrepreneurial capital, and I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a need for entrepreneurial short-term capital to come in when a sector is particularly nascent, because quite honestly, the longer-term patient capital that really can help drive long-term change, they're particularly risk-averse. So you need that higher risk capital to come in and make some change. But inherently, they want to get in quickly, they want to get out quickly. And so that means developers are often incentivized by driving for certain products that don't necessarily meet the sort of long-term standards. It's interesting to look at potentially the co-living sector. So those of you that may know me, I've been in the co-living sector for about 8 or 9 years. I was one of the first developers in the space trying to get co-living through. And this is not a conversation to focus on that, but it's useful as a little case study for a moment. So if you bear with me, its emergence in the purpose-built form has really been in the last sort of 8 or 9 years. But previously, the versions of co-living, just given what Brendan has talked about this morning, we almost need to look back before we can look forward. It's been around for a long, long time. It's been in hacker houses. It's been in HMOs. People have been sharing in forms of co-living, co-housing for a long, long time. And actually, there's benefits to sharing those amenities and sharing spaces because you're able to connect with people. And connection is really a key thing. And we fast forward to the recent pandemic that we're still sometimes feeling the after effects of, that really accelerated the need for connection and community. And so the idea of the use class order, the planning use class order, driving to create isolated communities is very juxtaposed. So really it's about thinking, how do we deliver connection community? So if we take co-living as a case study, a big disparity is the understanding of who is actually renting these spaces. And going back to my point around the consumers, it's everyone from 18 to 80-year-olds. I think there's a real misconception that it's only for postgraduates, party people, people in their 20s, people in their 30s that want to be living close to work. But actually, no, it's not. It serves the need all the way up to those a multi-generational product. But because the planning use class order is driven to a particular demographic and a particular typology, we then miss the opportunity of serving the much broader market. So this is the opportunity here, I think. And then going into this idea of profitable neighborhoods, it's really about creating community. So what Ash Sackler are proposing with this idea of the twins really drives density. So how do you get more pounds per square foot, value per square foot in this same area? And then a built-on opportunity beyond that is this idea of community. Now, it's not community that the build-to-rent and the co-living sectors have been creating over the last 4 or 5 years, which is ramming community down your throat, yoga classes and candle making classes. Yes, they're great, but it's the other elements too. It's the softer side of things. It's the non-specific matters. It's the passive security that these spaces and communities provide. It's the psychological safety that these spaces provide for people of all demographics, of all different personality types, not just your very gregarious individuals. It's for those who are more reserved. And so the rental sector has a broader opportunity, but it also has a broader obligation to meet the needs of a broader set of people. Now, this might seem inherently juxtaposed again or contradictory to what an investor strategy might be. But I'm here to say that actually that's probably wrong, in the idea that if you're coming at this from the perspective of an operator, what do you really want to do? You want to get sales? Absolutely. You want to be able to drive rent. But more importantly, you want to create a product that is sticky. I think we've heard this term many, many times, creating a sticky product. Now, if people love where they live and they feel connected to where they live, and that they're not doing this because they have no other choice, renting is now becoming a real choice, a lifestyle choice for people. So how do we surround that and how do we maximize on that? But actually, when you're creating this warm, fuzzy feeling, there's lower churn, lower costs, lower operational costs. There's also a much deeper tenant pool. And I think that's really valuable to understand, because going to the investment side of things, you can present to investors and say, actually, it's a much more defensible product, because you're not just serving a very thin segment of the market. And you're not just serving those who have just come out of university and those who are in their first and second jobs. You have got a much deeper tenant pool. And what does that mean for investment metrics? You get a keener yield and you get a higher GDV in your product. So actually, the idea of driving a bit more density, but also thinking about community and the consumer needs fundamentally, can actually drive long-term investment and a much more profitable space to be in.
Well, following on from Zafar and Kenny and Brendan, I think really at the heart of any discussion on these issues has to be planning. And I think Mike and I will now do a bit of a double act to work out how, this thinking can become reality with this planning system that we all live in between the two. And what I wanted to do was focus on the real opportunities we've got at the moment, the start of a new government, consultation at the moment until 24th of September, not just on a new draft NPPF, but there's a consultation document with 106 questions that touches on other aspects of the system, and we shouldn't regard those questions as closed. We all have exciting ideas that, if they serve to help the government and the country with the agenda and the issues that need solving, we need to get them there. So opportunities and challenges. When we look at the opportunities, of course, there's the overall target of 1.5 million new homes over this Parliament, and the changes to the NPPF and the other proposed changes to the system are partly aimed to try to achieve those numbers. But one of the most interesting things for me when we're looking at this particular topic this morning in the draft NPPF is the introduction of a specific new paragraph 69, which deals with the benefits of mixed tenure development. And it's not long, I'll just read it out. Mixed tenure sites can provide a range of benefits, including creating diverse communities and supporting timely build-out rates, and local planning authorities should support their development through their policies and decisions. Mixed tenure sites can include a mixture of ownership and rental tenures, including rented affordable housing and build to rent, as well as housing designed for specific groups, such as older people's housing and student accommodation, and plots sold for custom and self-build. To my mind, that is all absolutely on point. When you take that with the list of the high-level policy objectives that are set out in the consultation document, we see that high up is, of course, the need to deliver more affordable, well-designed homes more quickly, tick, 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 as well as the need for plans to promote an uplift in density in urban areas, tick. When we then look at, well, fine words, how is this going to be delivered? There we see the range of measures which are aimed at really requiring authorities to focus on housing numbers and where the housing should be. So, of course, moving to centrally imposed targets on local authorities based on a revised standard method for arriving at local housing need, which will mean that most areas will see increased targets. And local authorities will need to bring forward local plans to meet those needs unless there's a very good excuse, and Greenbelt isn't going to be an excuse. If an authority doesn't have an up-to-date plan or a 5-year housing land supply on the basis of the new method, the tilted balance in favour of development applies. There's an enhanced presumption in relation to brownfield land. Rules, of course, in relation to Greenbelt are being loosened with a less restrictive test in relation to brownfield Greenbelt land, in that you will only need to demonstrate that the development will not cause substantial harm to the openness of the Greenbelt, rather than that it won't have a greater impact on the openness of the Greenbelt. And I think that change will actually make quite a lot of difference when you're looking at brownfield sites in the Greenbelt. And then this new grey belt category, yes, it's amorphous, but basically land which makes a limited contribution to the purposes for designating land in the Greenbelt. And then finally, of course, there's the removal of the probably divisive references to beauty, which were introduced into the December 2023 document. But of course, still the references to good design, but I hope more looking to the future rather than what may have been implied in those references to beauty. And when we look at this profitable neighbourhoods concept, which I think is very clever and interesting, you know, there are also opportunities arising from the fact that low rise, scalable. When we consider the press last week over the phase 2 report into the Grenfell Tower tragedy, we know that fire safety and building control is going to be set for another shake-up. We really need to do better in terms of safety in relation to higher risk buildings. There are opportunities where we can build at a more human level. Challenges, well, I suppose we all have to ask whether this resolve from the new government is going to hold. My view is it will. It has to, because the government's number one unstated objective really is to obtain a second term, and it's not going to do that unless it's made a really good stab at achieving that 1.5 million homes target, which is going to mean often facing down constituency MPs, facing down local authorities which are resistant to higher numbers. So another challenge is going to be really the need to gauge which authorities have the appetite and resources to deliver, because we know it's not going to be all of them. And appeals are slow, they always will be, and uncertain. And we'll see increasing pressures on the planning inspectorate, because anecdotally, I'm already seeing far more applications being submitted by clients with a plan B of going to appeal. The usual legal hurdles in the planning area, some of which Zafar mentioned. I seem to have spent my last 10 years advising on the grey areas between C1, hostels, co-living, HMOs. It's ridiculous. And we need to shout long and hard about the need to modernize our approach to pigeonholing how people live. It just doesn't make sense. But added to that, of course, the constraints on public expenditure and the reluctance of successive governments to tax properly in order to deliver what communities need means that Section 106 agreements are always going to be difficult, and issues of viability over delivering social and physical infrastructure. We're still going to have, I think increasingly we'll have this debate about embodied carbon in terms of demolition versus refit. And that's going to be a challenge when we're looking to densify. And finally, I don't mean this to be a downer, but I'm a planning lawyer. It's in my blood, I suppose. You know, I see so many uncertainties about daylight and sunlight requirements as well, and really a disconnect between blind application of BRE standards and providing livable, denser environments. And I'd love to hear a bit more about that. And finally, and you know, if these proposals can go to assist with this, then fantastic. You know, overarching issues of viability and achieving profitable development, that also enables the bringing forward of affordable housing, including real affordable housing. If we can do that in the rest of this hour, I'll be really happy. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Simon. Morning, everyone. I was going to talk a little bit about some of the practicalities of the coalface, really, of planning and planning applications to kind of build upon a lot of what Kenny, Zafar and Simon have mentioned, really. In particularly kind of how we strategize models of this nature for operational living, really, to get good site selection and how the benefits can be utilized to make good decisions effectively. I think first and foremost, just building upon some of that positive policy rhetoric that's emerging that Simon mentioned. Clearly, we're heading in the right direction, but there's more to be done effectively, because planning policy and planning delivery is always behind the curve, particularly of emerging, exciting markets like the one we're talking about here. I think from my perspective, sustainable locations is going to be the critical aspect for site selection for these type of models to work well, and that's on a myriad of kind of planes, really, from a strategic perspective of trying to identify sites that could deliver these models from the offset, which is slightly a longer term model, to kind of picking up kind of immediate sites that, either through redevelopment and brownfield regeneration, or from, potentially those kind of edge of town sites that might fit the bill. I think density in respect to sustainability is primarily got to be linked, though, to good locations with access to public transport and amenities. And I think the model we've got here today that has been presented is very interesting in terms of the kind of the micro living aspect, but there's that macro connection as well that needs to be brought together. So that's really critical. But I think that the profitable neighbourhood model could bridge the gap of the policy paragraph that Simon referenced effectively, which is very much like a hybrid approach to operational living tenures. And that kind of mix of potential tenures, because of the size of the neighbourhoods, is quite a new niche model that would be quite interesting, because it will tick lots of boxes with local authorities and potentially give rise to more kind of affordable neighbourhoods effectively as well. Going back to selection criteria, then, I think for me, yes, picking the right locations, where you would target these type of neighbourhoods, the kind of towns and suburban areas of cities that could facilitate these will be critical. Clearly, the elephant in the room with planning is always bins, bikes, and cars. It's always been the way. It'll always be the same way, unfortunately, until we rip up the model. And that fundamentally is going to come hand in hand with build to rent in this model and this nature. So justifying the car-free living is going to be critical to terraced housing, because it's a very, as Kenny mentioned, it's a tried and tested methodology of successful neighbourhoods over time. But obviously, technology has changed over time. So getting technology to creep up with that is the critical bit. So looking at car rental schemes, car sharing schemes, electric bikes, access passes for public transport, the bus timetabling, all of that technology built into this is the kind of thing that planning doesn't really capture and doesn't understand. And I think that's a gap that has to be bridged with models of this nature, which would make it slightly more appealing and believable from a planning perspective. Obstacles, I think similarly, the site selection criteria is going to be difficult in the market that housing sits within, and hopefully that will improve. But scale and density obviously have their benefits as well as their negatives. I think clearly the emphasis on delivery and speed of delivery and occupation is going to be the real talking point for benefits. Slight negatives obviously is that the unknown entity of how prescriptive the planning system is at the moment, and how many technical aspects you have to satisfy, as Simon mentioned, daylight just being one. I think the mid-density range that Profitable Neighbourhoods is looking at is it could be quite a niche in that respect and could give rise to more opportunities. I think, but fundamentally, until things catch up, you'll always be working against policy guidance. So ultimately, your planning balance is always going to have to be driven by what benefits and how you present and evidence benefits to convince standard guidance is normally out of date and isn't fit for purpose. And I think, looking at good case studies and trying to demonstrate how that works is going to be the critical point of that. Affordability is an interesting one because obviously similarly at the density level, it's going to be more affordable, more deliverable, which is fantastic. But obviously the range of tenures from affordable housing to DMR, discount market rent, will be quite critical to this. And I think given the size of the units and the variety, that could be quite an interesting concept as well, that could really give leverage, particularly the crossover, as Zafar was saying, between kind of the co-living aspect, but also the later living aspect, access to ground floor flats for downsizing. It is a really interesting concept for truly mixed communities, and I think that's definitely a talking point. I think that could be expanded upon, and ultimately, I think as well is just the range and scale of the model and how it would integrate. I think it's critical for me in a planning perspective to have that mapped out, and I think. Given the wider obstacles in planning, such as open space standards, biodiversity net gain, etc., and similarly, as Simon touched upon as well, the sustainability aspect from a carbon perspective, it's kind of building those benefit packages from that front door housing aspect to deliver something that will be controversial in a planning sense. And I say that openly on the basis that planning is easily offended and not the most straightforward process in the world. So I think messaging and tackling messaging on that basis is really key. So I do like the how it's presented in that manner. But the after technical evidence in the background and site selection is going to be critical to that. Not an easy challenge, but similarly one that location is key fundamentally, I think is what I'm saying. But that was me. Thank you.
Mike, that's a brilliant perspective. I was thinking about on-site selection. Quite often, if you go to a local authority on a pre-app and you've got a very modest thing to fight through, they will they'll throw the book at you in every possible way. If you go in and you say, oh, well, we want to build, many hundreds of homes here, to strengthen your high streets and your education estate or whatever it is, everything changes. And so I quite like to invite Zafar to talk about that hub and spoke idea, whereby perhaps a profitable neighborhood is one that might be splintered into different forms and shapes, but in the same locality and still work operationally.
I think it's an interesting idea, the hub and spoke model, which again, from an operational standpoint, means that within, let's say, a 15-minute radius, you can have a series of decentralized dwellings. And actually, you can have a central operational facility, and whether that's serviced by electric bikes or a smaller community of operators that can go and make sure, because at the end of the day, no matter how much technology we utilize, there's still a human touch that's required. It still requires a pair of hands to change a light bulb or to fix a sink. And there's always going to be a requirement for that. And I think one of the challenges a lot of operators in the build-to-rent, co-living, PBSA space have found is actually the cost of managing and running buildings. So how do you do that from a decentralized place? But also this idea of over-amenitizing, I touched on it briefly, this idea of community and amenities being rammed down the throats of potential purchasers or potential renters, and then having to pay for it if they don't use those elements. So how do you decentralize that? So I think it's quite interesting where you can utilize this kind of hub and spoke model to then re-engage or activate certain locations of a town or a particular site that you might be selecting that ordinarily wouldn't be used for a contiguous single building. I think that's where it becomes quite interesting. And then you can...
And I think also, sorry to interrupt, that it shows some respect to local communities when you're coming, that you're coming to use the organizations, the social fabric that they've built up over a long time, that and you're not building this kind of fortress of inward looking housing. That's really important.
Absolutely. And I think, again, the challenges of being able to do that is, number one, having the foresight to be able to say, okay, I'm acquiring maybe 5 or 6 spots of land that are scattered within this 15-minute radius, but then also having the capital that enables you to do that. And ordinarily, if you're buying a red line, you're buying a title, assuming that you're buying 5 or 6 titles that are all roughly the same, or can all sort of work in the same time frame, is a challenge. But then also, can I take all 5 of these to planning at the same time? So there are some challenges in doing that. However, I have seen, and I am advising a few parties who own existing real estate and are looking at how do we optimize and how do we intensify the spaces that we have already within a given framework. So I think there's also another approach, and I think Simon touched on this in terms of the reuse of existing buildings. And how do you turn existing buildings into more densely utilized dwellings, and whether it is a retrofit model of the profitable, the twins model that can work. And I think that's where it becomes quite interesting.
And I think often you get some quite modest, shaky, little brick building that looks like nothing, but it can be the catalyst and can give you a sense of rootedness in it, even if a lot of it is new build. So I think retrofit just a real handmaiden and cousin or whatever to the twins.
Absolutely.
Can I ask? I think we need to understand. I mean, perhaps we could put the image of the townscape out. I think we need to understand this proposition a little bit better. Touching on. I mean, Zephyr picked up on the need to look at the consumer, the client as as a really principal focus point in this thing, and I think he's absolutely right in that regard. And I think Build to Rent, generally the living centre more broadly, has innovated terrifically in that. I mean, consumer culture was never part of house building until very recently. There were no B2C brands or B2B brands. So the shift to the consumer, I think, is underway, and it's been led by Build to Rent. And that's really interesting, because government policy and what we want in society is choice. We want this, we want new products coming forward. The planning system hasn't always supported that. They're a bit myopic in their understanding of what might be possible, and perhaps a little bit brittle. But listening to Simon and Mike, there's always room for maneuver and negotiation, it seems to me. But I need to understand this profitable neighborhoods a little bit better, because a house and a house, I get that idea. But a lot of what we've spoken about is actually townscape and planning policy focused solutions, which are critically important. But the consumer is ultimately going to be paying for this. The consumer, the resident pays the rent. That's the source of revenue, no matter what the development might be. So perhaps if we could you talk us through? I think the features in terms of townscape and the front doors and the shared amenity of the environment, the community you're in, is no different really to Build to Rent, where you rent the building. We can argue about how amenity is delivered, but the whole point of Build to Rent is that you're not stuck in your flat. You're stuck in an ecosystem that happens to, if it's a block of flats, be above ground. But to some extent, a suburb is just a flat version of that. So can you talk us through this?
I think it was interesting.
And what the quality of the consumer experience is, not just the townscape experience, will keep planners happy.
I think Brendan, when you came, I think, to our density design drills, looking at how we could put a lot of these on different shaped sites, you were saying it's like an apartment building that's fallen over, and to some degree that's right, but we don't have any corridors, so you're always out in the fresh air. It's extremely aligned with healthy living agendas and breaking down isolation. But just in terms of the capital costs, you're not laying much tarmac here, very little really. A lot of these SUDs that local authorities are demanding in new housing estates will be triply provided on a site like this. There is a front, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there are front doors to these homes. And then there's a kind of informal back door, which is also another kind of front door, in that these are very permeable, unredlined neighborhoods. People from adjacent communities and towns can just walk through here. And people's garden space is also a kind of blended shared allotment space, depending on what kind of governance each of these neighborhoods decides. You'll have more or less little fences and play spaces. It's very much a kit of parts that would respond to local ambition, and I suppose the pioneers that would move in to the first. One could think of this as a kind of string theory. Everybody moves into these terraces because they're sharing their energy bills with their neighbors. It's extremely sustainable. They can pick up their shared car from this space here, or maybe a little bit further on under the trees. The ends of the block, something that planners hate is terraces where you come to a blank gable end. And that doesn't happen here, because the ends of the terraces are opportunities to just twist the twins through 90 degrees and add in the mixed use that Simon was talking about, with different kinds of tenures, different kinds of social enterprise and micro enterprise. And I don't know, doesn't really matter if there's a Tesco Metro, if people want that too. It's not trying to be twee, it's trying to be a very robust, walkable village, walkable town, walkable city. I think it's a shame that the 15-minute city got hijacked as too woke. I think that everybody wants to be able to walk out their front door and find a pint of milk without getting in a car. And unfortunately, we're depriving people of that now. So obviously I could talk for hours about going into these places, talking about the east light, the west light, the healthiness of weaving staircases into your daily life, because we've had doctors and medical researchers on this project, and they all are excited about that idea that you know, even if you're in your 90s, you just like you would hire a car to go on a trip, you just hire your there's a lot of services for chairlifts, stair lifts. So you'd sit on your chair. When you got better, you'd get rid of it because it's really good for your heart to get back in the groove and do stairs. Is that answering some of what you were asking, or?
I think it does.
Right.
I think I think that one of the things that I think is incredibly attractive about this concept is that it aligns with the build to rent. I describe build to rent as the anchor tenant and regeneration, and the reason I say that is because we want to build at scale, and we want bums and beds. We want people in those homes quickly. We don't build at the pace of sales as in the traditional house building market. So this idea of being able to create a community very quickly, and then use that community to act as a catalyst for other types of tenure, the multi-tenure pieces, is, I think, a very attractive shift in the policy regime. So there's lots of attractive qualities about this, and I having looked at the plans, I know the actual homes themselves will be terrific. But I suppose my question comes in: how do we bring this to the market? What would you need from a client, say from a developer, to say, look, we need to start looking at communities and neighborhoods in this way, as well as the traditional house building way? What does a good client look like to you? How would you like them to approach this, approach the delivery of this, and what challenges do you think might be there?
We did have one great client up in Newcastle, Igloo Regeneration, and Chris Brown, David Roberts supported this idea of toggling units and densifying the fabric. It was a joint venture with Newcastle City Council. because it was a while ago, we had a battle with the cars. If we built it now, nobody would want any cars there. Just like where I'm sitting in Camden, you can't do any new building with any car provision. So that's in cities, of course, but we have a lot of market towns, and Jonathan Smales from Human Nature Developers in Lewes have got us to get planning permission for 45 homes in this kind of profitable neighbourhoods density and form in the most sensitive parts of the country, in a national park, right on a river, right on the edge of a very bucolic landscape in the South Downs. And that is just the first of what's going to be 700 homes. But the point is that these 700 homes, they feel like a co-production with the local community, because there have been years of festivals, well, years, I mean, just a few years, but it's been quite intense with local people. Existing businesses have been nurtured. Others from different parts of the town have been brought in. So it is a new art of cooking, but the benefits are so enormous that hopefully people like Zafar and other developers are going to come in and start this catalytic communities that I feel are going to outperform the house builders quite significantly.
I really like the idea of the consumer focus, I have to admit, from a planning perspective. I think that's something that isn't done enough in planning. It takes time, takes a lot of effort, and takes a belief system as well, I think. And if you're looking at the settlement criteria for towns, secondary towns particularly, I know on your website, Canny Bedford is identified, which is a really good location, between major cities, East West Rail, lots of potential. The economic uplift that the government's looking at in that region alone is critical to site selection. But from a public engagement perspective, I think understanding what the consumer wants and needs and getting them on board early on some form of platform would be really helpful. And I think, Brennan, what you were talking about, which was the kind of the end product, the value, I think social value is more important now in planning than it ever was. But it's still in its infancy from kind of pre-conception and planning through to delivery. And clearly, without case studies, etc., it's hard to do. But you can commit to that, to the life of a project like this, because there's a legacy to it, because the value is on repeat occupation, increased enjoyment, people wanting to compete to be here for a long term to make it profitable. And measuring that over time from a social value perspective is really critical, because people can't really ignore that, particularly if there's social, economic, and environmental benefits. That it's hard to front load that in the planning to convince decision makers. So that is how I would start. I would try to get that early engagement piece, so that you've got not 60 people of a certain demographic complaining about where's everyone going to park, but you've actually got a range of people that are really interested in where they might want to live and how you could actually improve existing neighbourhoods through the creation of new neighbourhoods, because it's that interconnecting piece that's really missing. The benefit of sites like this or concepts like this helping to regenerate the surroundings is also part of the process.
Most definitely. I mean, from my perspective as a developer, I think, notwithstanding, and I completely agree, Mike, the idea of being consumer-led or demonstrating to planning consumer-led. I've done countless presentations, a day in the life of operational management plans and various other things. And I think they're well received. My worry or my reticence is that they're often very quickly forgotten. And I think there's obviously a need to consistently show that or demonstrate that to the right decision makers, because again, it needs to fit in a very, very prescriptive box. It needs to meet a very prescriptive policy. I think that's not to say that we shouldn't continue doing so. And I guess once we've passed that hurdle, assuming that there's support to be able to do something, I always feel, especially recently, I say recently in the last few years, the thing that's really caught out a lot of developers, and I might be slightly more London biased when I'm saying this, is the affordable housing assessment, especially for rental product, be that build to rent or co-living or any of the other different forms. And it feels like we've got you now, And it's just a real challenge, because I think the opportunity with a typology like this is actually to try and deliver affordable with a small A homes, whereas they're often seen by decision makers or viability assessors that you can drive significantly more rents because we've been through a period of boom in the BTR space. And so therefore, these types of units, if you can densify them, you can drive more rent, therefore you can drive more value, therefore your affordable housing contribution needs to be significantly higher, to the point where it becomes effectively punitive. And so as a developer, I'm a lot less inclined to want to do that unless there's clear guidance, clear process. And I think, again, we, the collective we, as a movement to try and champion something like this in different forms of densified uses and reuses of buildings, we need to bring that conversation up front. As an example, again, when the GLA were consulting on the London plan for the design standards for co-living, that went through a process of many, many years, and eventually that got captured in the February term this year. So it's only been sort of 8-9 years in the making, but they hadn't dealt with the affordable housing piece. That's still, I think it's still probably in consultation. Simon probably knows that better than I do at this moment in time. But again, you deal with the design elements, and a year later we'll deal with or a year or 2 years later we'll deal with the affordable housing. They need to be brought together, because again, if I'm assessing a potential opportunity, presenting this to potential investors or my partners, how do I really square that circle? Because we're looking at it on a 5 to 7 to 10 year thesis. So again, it's a real challenge for us, but we need to be bringing that conversation up front.
Affordable housing piece is a really there's a whole series of webinars on that all on its own. I mean,
Indeed.
But we could have to start to think about wrapping up. But as I listen to this, it strikes me that, you know, and Mike, you kind of alluded to it there, that emphasizing social value in the long term will mitigate some planning risk. I mean, it falls on softer ears, you know, because of the wider value spectrum that it offers. Now, that's an interesting shift, and I suppose in a planning strategy, you know, which it's part of this evolution, I think, of how we bring new product forward, this new thinking, this shift away from the status quo as we move into hopefully a new era of building. So there's great value in that, notwithstanding the affordable housing thing. I agree, it's a very, very complex area. But at the end of the day, we still we have to make this attractive to the customer. I mean, there's an organization, one of our members, One Shared Voice, is sort of pro YIMBY movement. There's now a YIMBY movement in the Labour Party, you know, looking at gathering data from communities to saying, you need houses, how about this? And they have a positive response to that, and they submit that with the planning application, and then suddenly the planning officer or has data supporting perhaps a personal desire to allow something to happen, but not having the evidence to kind of challenge the policy or prove its legitimacy in front of that policy. So we're seeing technology and social media in this case starting to influence the planning process as well as new product coming forward. So there's great grounds for optimism in this regard, notwithstanding the challenges. But if we're going to hit 1.5 million homes, we really need every single home that we can get. It's not a question of a little bit over here and a little bit over there and an experiment over there. We have to address the issue of scale and the delivery at scale of multiple homes of all type, not just built to rent, but of all types, or single family of all types. Where do we've got to start with practical stuff. Where do we start? Kenny, you know, who do you want to talk to start this conversation, to draw it together? Who are the people that we need to get behind this idea? Because there's so many benefits to it.
Well, I think that there's a lot of pre-existing permissions where the list of conditions is just a bit too long, and with the environmental additions, they're kind of languishing a bit. And I think that smaller developments or denser corners to larger areas could be really, really useful to demonstrate the possibilities of living like this. And often you get town extensions where the nearest corner is the place to start. So I think there's many situations, you know, languishing buildings at risk on the you know, heritage list, or sites which are in the Homes England hub site, which are like they want to kick off for a whole bevy of reasons. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. We just want to demonstrate, ideally in built form over the next few years, that this is something that people want to live in. And we have got a website which is called peopleofthemailings.co.uk, and that has the voices of people living in a profitable neighbourhood like this, up in just outside the Newcastle city centre. And it's just a bit fascinating to hear them discuss whether the house has changed their lives and why. And I think that the more evidence base we can get from the real lived experience of small neighborhoods will just change the first of all, the agents' minds, but then the policy landscape fairly rapidly.
So people will trump policy, is that what you're saying? I mean, I think it's a fair enough challenge, isn't it?
I mean, going back to what Zafar said, is they're the ones with the money, do you know? Like this, that's the oil that makes the engine work. So the green renewables, you say.
So we have literally a minute left. If we always like to finish with sort of actions, not just words. So as a closing remark, just from everybody, and Simon, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind. 1 or 2 actions that you think we should take on to promote and to help deliver profitable neighborhoods. What would you suggest?
Well, the first obvious one is to make representations to the government's consultation on the draft NPPF and changes to planning policy. And when I say make representations, I suppose use that process as a Trojan horse to deliver these sorts of ideas. And the second thing is to really look for the easy wins in terms of authorities and sites and development partners where this could be turned into reality sooner rather than later, because, you know, we've got to be opportunistic. So those are my obvious points.
Zafar, what would you say?
Probably riffing off of Simon on the second point, we've got potential sites in our pipeline that might be well suited for this. And I think my invitation to my colleagues on the call and those listening in would be, let's pool resources, whether that's the YIMBYism movement and the data they can collate, whether it's a planning strategy for a minor amendment or a Section 73, to be able to take a section of a particular development that we have under our belt at the moment to see if we can deliver this. And I think it's always better to have something as a hard element as opposed to a conceptual discussion. So we've got sites where we can start to explore this, and I'd be really keen to do that with everyone. So maybe we set up a steering group afterwards to try and do that.
And Mike?
Yeah, I'll piggyback a little bit as well. So yeah, definitely influence policy. That's definitively. I think I knock on doors. I think from you identify where these locations are and where you have sites, and go and speak to local authorities and pitch this idea. I think, there will be portfolio holders and officers that will be amenable to listen. There'll be many that won't, but there'll be many that will, and that will be tried and tested. But I think the other example, again, riffing off Zafar a little bit, I think you need some case studies. I think you need something to draw upon that you can showcase. And I think I really like the idea of a testing pot. We're doing this with some developers at the moment, rather than take on, a neighborhood of 650, 700 homes. They're doing a third, and a third. So retrofitting existing consents, delivering the affordable as standard, so it's not contentious, delivering some market because that's what everyone's comfortable with, and then delivering a third of a similar type of single multi-family housing. There's no restriction on that in an existing planning sense, because anyone can buy a house and rent them. But then you've got something that you can work with, and then if it's done well, as Canny sets out with good quality design, and people live and enjoy those spaces, you've got a case study then that you can return to and showcase.
No, thank you. And Kenny, last words to you before I.
Thank you. So absolutely going to make that representation. I hadn't thought of it, I must admit, but Simon, Profitable Neighbourhoods will be submitting something for the 24th. We really, I think that we have no fear of planning or local authorities loving what we do. We just need to be agile and get the money. We need to convince the investors. I think that's obviously a steep mountain to climb, and urbanists and architects are often, many layers away from investment decisions. But Profitable Neighbourhoods aims to be this shared territory, and we really hope that that's going to take off this year.
Well, I think that's a very good place in which to end, because I think that this is not the end of the story. We have 2 more sessions on Profitable Neighborhood where we'll be looking at different aspects of this and trying to make it as attractive as possible, both to investors, to consumers, and indeed to planning local authorities. So they are on the 8th of October and the 22nd of October respectively. We'll confirm the content of those sessions closer to the time, and this is certainly something that we want to promote in the ARL as part of a solution for the future of the country, and indeed to deliver the many homes that we need here in the UK. Thank you very much to the panel. It's been brilliant. I've learned a great deal. It's fascinating, but I'm left with a huge amount of optimism that despite all the challenges, there are solutions coming forward which are deliverable, and they are scalable, and they're delightful places to live. So thank you all very much again. Thank you for those who have attended this morning, and I wish you all a very good day. Bye-bye.